I would like to speak to you about things that you're interested in. Of course, I'm most familiar with the things that are interesting for Hungary in terms of the cultural diplomacy, and that's what I will speak shortly. But of course, I'm ready to engage in discussions with you on a number of matters. First of all, since also the conference title concerned economy, I thought I would also speak about that a little bit, because there is no strong nation without obviously a strong economy, and in Europe these countries all went through some ordeals, and Hungary was the first who needed a bailout in 2008 from the IMF, and now it's a completely different landscape. But before I venture into that, I would just raise a few issues that are specific or topical to Hungary, because I do feel that our case is a little bit special for culture. First of all, it is because our language is impossible to learn, and it's impossible to disseminate, of course, just using very elementary, rudimentary, science. You probably know that it's not an Indo-European language. It's most closely related to Finnish and Estonian, but the Finns and the Estonians actually can understand each other for 70% or so. The Estonians during communist times were looking at Finnish TV or listening to Finnish radio. Hungarians do have the same grammatical structure, and we share some very important, unique identifiers. For example, we don't have gender in our language, which makes us very politically correct. So we do have to identify the person that we are talking about, whether it's a lady or a man. And some basic common words like fish and fire and house, which were relevant, I think, to the time when we were still together. Beyond this, Hungarian is really left alone, and the Dutch and the German, all the Neo-Latin languages. It would be so nice to have that easy communication, but we don't have that. So obviously, for us, literature and translations or movies or any kind of products in the cultural field will have to stand on their own. It will either have to be accompanied by a translation, or it will have to live on its own as a performance. But of course, that has an effect, coupled with the fact that we are one of the longest organized states in Europe. And I mean, the country, yes, Hungary was established in the year 1000 when our first king, St. Stephen, accepted the crown from Rome. Making or solidifying us in the Christian Roman Catholic tradition. But also becoming a part of a big cultural civilization, the Judeo-Christian culture, but at the same time, we are also a little bit isolated. All the countries around us are part either Neo-Latin culture, like our Romanian friends, or the German ones that we belong to a lot of for a lot of time in our history, Austria and Germany, or Western Slavic or Southern Slavic countries. So it's really sort of an island on its own, with people who are not very prone on migrating. We don't have, when they speak about, and that's also of course a public image, you don't hear about Hungarian plumbers, because Hungarians, partly because they are limited in their capacity to speak foreign languages, are less prone to travel compared to the region's countries. Probably Hungarians are the most likely to stay in Hungary and stay in their countries, partly because the life is relatively good there, but it's also because they just want to be in that cultural island, which makes it difficult for all the cultural diplomats to go out and sell the idea of Hungary, because the way to encounter Hungary and encounter Hungarians is to travel to the country. It's a major tourist destination, even from this country, but at the same time, it's a challenge, and it has its particularities. At the same time, just to show up, the usual slogans that Hungarians like to think of themselves, and some of them, well, the ones that I will tell you are true. Of course, it's a unique country where sports is, of course, part of the universal culture, and it's very important for us. And somebody mentioned Puskás, I think, coming in. I mean, that's the name people universally recognize, because he's the most famous Hungarian footballer, and still, decades after his active role, people would qualify. But we are also the 8th most successful country in the history of Summer Olympics in terms of the medals, which is amazing for a country this small. Their proportion, it's quite high. Or if you take science and innovation, we have a very high number of Nobel Prize winners, although they tend to either for hydrogen bombs or the computer or the ballpoint pen. Most of them, except, thank you, Albert Szent-Györgyi, they received their Nobel Prizes once they left Hungary, and they developed their research elsewhere, which has a lot to say about also the country. And of course, music, if you talk about Bartók or Kodály or Liszt, we just had the handover ceremony at the Polish Embassy of the Visegrad IV presidency, which Hungary is now for 3 days. We had Chopin on the Polish side and Bartók and Liszt on our side. It's very, very well known. Even there is a Bartók statue in Brussels, so that's one of the cultural exports that people recognize. And of course, we have a lot of design and other products, even a literary Nobel Prize from Imre Kertész. But if you remember the Rubik's Cube, I mean, that's also something that people readily identify. My colleague also brought a few things. I mean, these are not necessarily topical, but also part of the cultural diplomacy. So you can see some of these things. It's World Heritage Sites in Hungary, and the other is talent and ingenuity. If you want to take a look at this, of course, these are countries that spend. We have other copies that to share. And then the other specificity which needs to be borne in mind is that we are sort of a cultural nation because of some of the difficult history that my Slovak colleague has mentioned. Of course, Hungary now proper has 10 million Hungarians, but the language is spoken and the culture is shared by at least 50 million people who are outside of the country for many historical reasons. There is a realm of ethnic Hungarians who are living in Romania, in Slovakia, in Serbia, in other countries, and there is also a big diaspora, not as big as the Greek or the Armenian, but it's quite big, and mainly because of the various turns of history, the most recent being 1956, where it was over 250,000 Hungarians who left the country, and that's why you have a big community here in Belgium. But here, actually, for those of you who are Belgian, it's important to mention one interesting historical fact also, that our first 6,000 strong immigration in mass in Belgium happened after the First World War. We were on different sides of the conflict. Hungary was, of course, on the losing side, and the breakup of the Austria-Hungary and the monarchy happened then. But between 1922 and 1927, more than 30,000 Hungarian kids spent here 6 months or a year or stayed here forever because Belgian families, and mainly Flemish families actually in the north of the country, had them as guests for some time to help them to feed better, because of course the country was going through some tough times. So we have a lot of Hungarians, and one of the goals of our cultural diplomacy program is to reach, to have sort of that warmness of home. It's important for us here is to have all the Hungarians gather around this, who are second, third, fourth generation Hungarians, might not even be able to speak the language, but to come and enjoy and be a part of Hungarian culture. So this is also to preserve their Hungarianness. On the other hand, of course, it's much more important, and that's our primary goal, for example, in our institute here, is to reach out to the Belgians and the Luxembourgish, but also for all the different nationalities who are here from the 28 European Union countries and beyond, who might have multiplicator effect from coming from Latvia, Riga, or Lisbon, Portugal. They might attend the design show or a special dancing exhibition at the Hungarian Cultural Institute. I might, now that referring to some of the things that my colleague was talking about, I might not speak that much in length in cultural diplomacy and economy, in the sense that economy is important. I'm ready to tell you that we are out of the European excessive deficit procedure and all the others, but that might be less relevant to you, and I would just venture on into moving to the actual presentation of telling you what the Hungarian cultural diplomacy structure is about. The one thing that I would still mention, though, is how important to have working market economy and a successful economy in order to be able to do all these cultural activities. Not only because, of course, you need to have the budget from for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Ministry of Culture and Education to be able to mount these issues, but it's a very important tool for us, for example, when we have Hungarian investors who are coming to Hungary, and they established a Mercedes factory where they manufacture the A and B class or the Samsonite, very expensive suitcases. Then they will at some point contribute to our activities here in order to be able to have Hungarian language courses at universities here, or some other relations where economy or business and culture are interrelated. We have a cultural diplomacy network, which is represented by 19 institutes. It's called the Institute Balassi. It's you can probably check the website, and I also will check that I will not speak too long. These are, just very quickly, in Vienna, Berlin, Brussels, Bucharest, Delhi, in India, Helsinki, Cairo, London, Moscow, New York, Paris, Bratislava, Prague, Rome, Szepsi-Szentgyörgy, Svantu-Jorge, if I pronounce it well, Stuttgart, Sofia, Tallinn, and Warsaw. These are the places where there's a Hungarian display on a permanent basis. But we, of course, have people who are dealing with education and cultural diplomacy and all the other related subjects at all the Hungarian embassies, which we have about 80, and altogether we have about 103 missions around the world. The Balassi Institute plays a very important role in the proper representation of what Hungary is about. And these institutes are considered to be outposts which have a great responsibility of portraying the Hungarian message for those who want to see a trendy country where it's fun to visit, and also the more popular or more classical effects. For example, a few years ago they had an advertisements series which was quite controversial, so that's why I would mention it, that it can fire both ways. It was advertising Hungary as a very welcoming and very warm country to visit by having Hungary portrayed as, the Turks stayed there for 150 years, the Soviets or the Russians stayed there for 40 years. It's a very welcoming place. You should also come visit. Of course, that makes it a very trendy place, but of course that's why it's important. Now, the Balassi system is actually not the first one that Hungary had. In 2012, actually, we commemorated the 85th anniversary of the history of the Hungarian cultural diplomacy, on the occasion of the fact that the Hungarian parliament then, in 1927, passed the Collegium Hungaricum law, which actually one of the most famous was operating in this country at KUL, the Leuven Catholic University. But probably most of you are not Belgian, or most of you are Belgian. No, so that I will lose a little bit of the Belgian references then, but of course it's important for us being here. These first Hungarian institutes were established by Kuno Klebelsberg, who was the Minister of Culture at that time, and he wanted to first build a relationship with the cultural and the international scientific community. That's why in Vienna and Berlin, the two traditional cities that were very important for Hungary then and now, and then later in Rome and Paris. Organizing scientific life and education make up of the fundamental part of the Institute's activity today. The main goal is, of course, to preserve and promote extensively the natural cultural heritage, both for Hungarians and non-Hungarians alike, to foster and maintain relationships in cultural diplomacy with the recipient country, to further international cultural and scientific cooperation, Hungarian language teaching for those of us who are brave enough, and to demonstrate the diversity of Hungarian culture and society by ways of providing information and event organizing. Very good. Which means that you can all go study Hungarian at the Balassi Institute, which I mentioned. The last time I was popping in on one of these courses and found out that the biggest motivation still to learn another language if you're in love with the other person. So I think that's probably the most important element of cultural diplomacy that I should have mentioned. I mentioned the network of Hungarian diplomats. Now, during the period of the Hungarian presidency of the Council of the European Union, we had to also take our part in managing EU matters in cultural diplomacy, and this was the European Heritage Label and also the Place of Culture in Europe 2020. Hungary has also been the member of UNESCO since 1948, and I mention this because since October 2011, a Hungarian colleague of mine, Mrs. Katalin Bogyai, is the president of the General Conference of that organization. We also take part, as I mentioned, the Visegrad presidency in the Visegrad Fund, which is also works alongside the Central European Initiative, and which is coupled with Vienna with the Danube Cultural Center. Since 1991, but that started actually in the 14th century, Hungary and our Central European partners, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Poland, although when it was founded in 1991 it was still Czechoslovakia, established the Visegrad Group of Four. So there are concentric layers in our cultural identity, because we would not only like to be seen as Hungarians and Europeans, the two bigger end, we would also like to be seen as Central Europeans, together with Jan Fiegel and all the colleagues from Poland and the Czech Republic. Hungary also hosted one of the European Capitals of Culture in Pécs in 2010, which is a southern city, and now we are looking forward to Mons in 2015. And then I probably have 2.5 or 3 minutes. I would mention some of the recent cultural actions, how it is in practice every day. We just opened a new cultural institute in Beijing because, of course, there's a big trend. If I mention trendy, of course, opening to the east, and most countries are doing that. And of course, China is a very important place. But of course, it's very humbling if you're. I've been there as representing the Council of the European Union during the EU presidency, and of course, if you see the 6 ring roads around Beijing and look at the number of people who are living there, which is more probably than most of the European countries' population, then you realize how much effect that you can really do with an office there. But in any case, that's an important measure. We are also currently the guest of honor, and it has a very cool website, you should check it out, the Smithsonian Folklife Festival in Washington, D.C., which is organized in the U.S. Since 1967 and draws up millions of people in person and also through active media coverage. We are also launching together Roma-related programs. During the Hungarian EU presidency, it was very important how we tackled this issue, and Hungary got very good marks from the European Commission recently. That part of the world has a very unique tradition and the richness from this culture that could be shown to overcome prejudices and to show the value of these programs. And of course, our past haunts us in many ways, and we have very important anniversary is next year, 2014. Jan Fiegel, my colleague, mentioned the First World War. For those of you who are Belgians, know how important it will be to commemorate the first centennial of the First War. We have a committee to remember that, and we also have this child-saving program to be put on portray to feel how people reacted here, although they were on the other side of the conflict. And then, of course, it's also the sad 70th anniversary of the Hungarian Holocaust. Hungarian Jews were discriminated against. It was one of the first countries even. It started in 1920, as early as 1920. At the same time, Hungarian Jews were not deported up until 1944. It happened only after and under German occupation, and it happened in a span of really a few months, where 600,000 of our countrymen, Hungarians, Jewish Hungarians, Hungarian Jews were murdered in Auschwitz, and we dedicate a full year to that. So the approach is both institutional, we have a fairly wide representation, and there are very many topical programs that are trying to build on this very special Hungarian case, an isolated language, a very rich, successful history in sports and music and design and innovation, and of course all the topical big anniversary-related or festival-related programs. And I think I've used up all my time, and I'm very happy to respond to any questions that you may have on some of these practical aspects of the program. Thank you.